Thanks for joining us for this Global Supply Chain Leaders Spotlight interview. I'm Greg Thompson. I'm joined by Foster Finley. And Foster, tell us a little bit about nearshoring, because I know that's something you've brought up during the conference.
Right. Nearshoring is essentially the trend of U.S.-bound goods being manufactured closer to the U.S., including in the U.S., where oftentimes these items might have been made in Asia, might have been made in parts of Europe. They're coming back to areas closer to the point of consumption, most notably to Mexico and to the United States.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that, because it does have some implications for China, some of the Asian markets, because I think as people look at the supply chain, they are looking at controlling cost, the bottom line, and all that. And is that kind of playing into it? Because I know in China, we've seen, and in Asia, across the board, as we've seen in the conference, the minimum wage is going up exponentially, which obviously adds to cost of goods, and you've got the time to get the goods to market. Are all of these factors kind of playing into that?
Absolutely. What I would say is the manner in which we look at it is 7 factors. Direct wages, which you just brought up, and Chinese real wages have been increasing pretty rapidly. The cost of direct materials in the source country, which varies dramatically based on the availability of the product. Local overhead, which again varies very dramatically with regards to the nature of the country that we're talking about. Inbound transportation, so obviously from products that may have originated in India or China, which have inland transportation, ports, many weeks on the water, go through another port and get surface transportation to a point of consumption, is a big driver versus Mexico, which is in many cases easier. You've either got a rail ability to bring it in from Mexico or to trucking it in. There's an inventory implication to that as well, because the longer goods have to sit on the water on their inbound leg, the more you have to plan for buffer stock for interruptions or supply chain discontinuity. Also, tariff rates that vary between trading partners. And lastly, foreign exchange variations. So those are the 7 factors we look at. China has been disadvantageously increasing in their costs. Mexico and a number of the other nearshore countries have stayed relatively more competitive with regards to China.
Okay, and so this is helping obviously Mexico, and how is it impacting the European Union?
Well, to actually go through the same exercise, you have to think about where the point of destination happens to be and what the denomination is. So the statistics that we have most recently put out are about US-bound goods in US dollars. When you transport that to Europe and take your pick of Euro country or Great British Pounds in the UK or Swiss francs in Switzerland, you basically have to go through the process of saying, what are the countries, based on the nature of the product, that are going to provide the lowest cost for a landed good in that country? For them, there are some products best sourced out of Asia. They tend to be soft goods, garments, things like that, knitwears coming from India. But a lot of the products that are most economical to land into Europe are coming from the Maghreb, which is the northernmost port of Africa, or from Eastern Europe. There are some things that are sourced out of Central America or Mexico and the like, but less. They're more specific when you actually have to add that ocean leg to make it over to the EU.
Now, when we look at nearshoring and some of the adjustments that maybe the Asian markets will make with that, I mean, how can they adjust, and what is the future of nearshoring?
Well, the statistics we're looking at are kind of at that macroeconomic level. Every decision to move a product from one source of manufacturing to another has a variety of considerations that have to be taken into account. There are regulated products, whether it's from, if it could be in the aerospace and defense industry, may be overseen by the FAA. Could be medical, overseen by the FDA. Could be sometimes something subject to your customer's approval based on where the line is. When tooling is involved, oftentimes it may be less costly to move to another location, but it would require relocating or reconstructing tooling that's already with a given supplier. When we look at scenarios that span a multitude of products, if you've got an Asian supplier, as a for instance, and can find certain parts that lend themselves to be economically transferred to another part of the world, whether it's Mexico or anywhere else, you're left with the issue of what about the residual that I'm leaving with that same manufacturing site or provider or supplier, if that happens to be the relationship that's left, which could create stranded costs and becomes a bit of a difficulty. So we typically go through it from a scenario development standpoint, and even having taken what I just mentioned into consideration, we've seen a pretty dramatic increase in nearshoring coming back to the U.S. And sometimes that's because manufacturers have discussions with the government and get some subsidies either from tax abatement or utilities or training for the workforce and things like that. All of those can factor into a one-time decision, which are having an impact on where goods move from and to.
Sure, and if you look at some of the auto manufacturing plants and some of the ones that have been built in South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee with the Volkswagen plant.
Right.
I mean, these are, I would say, pretty good examples of nearshoring and folks that have looked at, plugging in a manufacturing site, which obviously helps with U.S. jobs. I guess from a macro level, they're looking at every cost, every impact, and how you can flow it through the supply chain quicker, faster, more efficiently.
Right. So the Southeast has been an area that's disproportionately benefited from some of that growth. The plants that you mentioned, there's also, we could add BMW and Mercedes that also have Southeastern plants, tend to be final assembly. The parts that go to those final assembly plants are coming from all around the world, including locations in Europe, particularly Germany, Mexico, Asia, and the like. But I'm sure they're going through the process of evaluating where those source goods come to make sure that by the time they get to those final assembly plants in the Southeast, they've sourced them from places that are the most economical for them.
Well, nearshoring is going to be very interesting to watch over the next few years and the implications for the supply chain.
Absolutely. I'm fond of a quote that I think it was Wayne Gretzky that talked about in hockey. It wasn't where the puck is, it's where the puck's going to be.
That's right.
And from the standpoint of a supply chain professional, it's an aspect of business that has historically been a little reactive. Somebody says, here's the plant, get it from there to here. Increasingly, with the ascendance of the function, we're taking a much more interventionist role and saying, you know what, based on supply chains continuity, costs that are part of that, a very large horizontal function, we're beginning to become more proactive to say, here is a location or here is a country that's best suited to get the products that we're talking about. So instead of somebody simply waiting until say, here's where I've sourced it or here's where the plant is, we now tend to be collaborating a lot more with regards to where the decision is to locate manufacturing.
Looking at that total picture.
Exactly.
Well, Foster, thank you very much for your time. That's our interview spotlight.